My hay baler was sinking. $9,000 of equipment, half submerged in brown water, tilting sideways like a shipwreck, in the middle of a field that was bone dry 8 hours ago. I stood at the muddy edge, coffee still warm in my hand, boots slowly sinking. The smell hit me like a wall, wet clay and something rotting underneath it. 2 acres, gone overnight. 60 years of my grandfather's land, underwater. Nobody called me, nobody knocked. They just sent a backhoe. Margot Whitfield, HOA president next door, pulled strings, got a permit signed, and redirected her entire neighborhood's stormwater straight onto my land. Didn't ask, didn't pay, just sent a handwritten note hoping I'd move past this small misunderstanding. I folded the letter, said nothing, because I knew one thing Margot didn't. Water always finds its way back, and when it did, her neighborhood paid a price she never saw coming. What would you do? Drop your state in the comments. My name is Everett, and what I own matters more to this story than who I am. What matters is what I own, a working parcel of land in the rural suburban fringe of Central Virginia. 43 acres my grandfather bought in 1961 for $11,000 cash and a handshake with a man who kept his word. The deed has 4 names on it going back 2 generations. My father ran cattle here. I run a small hay operation, rent pasture to a neighbor's horses, and grow a kitchen garden big enough to feed a small army through the summer. The land is flat at the front, rolls gently toward a natural drainage swale at the back, a low corridor that, for 60 years, has quietly moved rainwater off our property and into a seasonal creek 200 yards east. Nothing dramatic, just geography doing its job. Now zoom out about a quarter mile. Starting in 2018, a developer named Breckenridge Harmon, and yes, that is a real name, I couldn't make it up, carved a 214-unit planned community called Ashford Crossing out of what used to be a farm almost identical to mine. Manicured lawns, vinyl fences painted to look like wood, a clubhouse with a putting green nobody uses. The kind of neighborhood where the grass is always the same shade of green because everyone uses the same lawn service and no one knows their neighbors' last names. The HOA that governs Ashford Crossing is, by any reasonable measure, the pettiest organization in the county. I know this not because I joined it. I am not part of their HOA. I am not in their neighborhood. I do not answer to them in any legal capacity. But because over 3 years I watched them fine a retired schoolteacher named Dolores for having a wind chime. I watched them cite a veteran named Pruitt for leaving his trash can at the curb 2 hours past collection. I watched them force a young couple to repaint their shutters because the color, and I quote the meeting minutes here, read more burgundy than the approved colonial red. The HOA president was a woman I'll call Margot Whitfield. Mid-50s, silver bob, drove a pearl-white Lexus SUV with a custom vanity plate that said ASHFRD1. She'd moved into Ashford Crossing 5 years prior from somewhere in northern Maryland, and had, in the intervening time, accumulated the kind of local influence that small people accumulate when nobody pushes back. She sat on the county planning subcommittee, co-chaired the neighborhood watch, and had a personal relationship with 2 members of the zoning board, both of whom attended her annual garden party. Margot had decided, sometime in the spring of 2021, that the stormwater retention system inside Ashford Crossing was undersized, which, frankly, was true. It was a cut-rate design on a cut-rate budget. When it rained hard, the lowest streets in the development flooded ankle-deep. Residents complained. Margot needed a solution that didn't involve spending HOA reserve funds, didn't involve suing the developer, who'd long since dissolved the LLC that built the subdivision, and didn't involve going to the county with hat in hand. What she needed, apparently, was my field. The first unfair act came in the form of a letter. Typed on HOA letterhead, delivered certified mail, it informed me that Ashford Crossing intended to submit a stormwater easement application to the county that would, in the interest of regional drainage management, redirect a portion of their outflow through the southern edge of my property. The letter used the word cooperative 4 times. It did not use the word compensation once. I read that letter standing at my kitchen table, the smell of bacon grease and burnt coffee still hanging in the air, gravel crunching under my boots where I'd tracked it in from the barn. My first instinct was to call my neighbor Dale and laugh about it. My second instinct, the one I should have listened to, was to call a lawyer. I did not call a lawyer, not yet. I made what I now recognize as the classic rural landowner mistake. I assumed good faith would meet good faith. I wrote back, politely. I explained that my property's natural drainage swale was already operating at capacity during heavy rain events, that redirecting additional engineered outflow onto agricultural land without compensation or proper hydrological study was problematic, and that I'd be happy to discuss alternatives, including a shared cost arrangement for upgrading the Ashford Crossing retention pond. I sent the letter via certified mail. I kept a copy. I waited 3 weeks. No response. Instead, what I got was a knock on my door on a Wednesday afternoon in early June. A county code enforcement officer named Dexter, who was apologetic in the way that people are apologetic when they know they're delivering bad news that's not their fault. He handed me a notice of a pending variance hearing. Margot's HOA had filed for a drainage variance that would, if approved by the county planning board, legally authorize the rerouting of Ashford Crossing's overflow drainage through my land. Did they contact the property owner? I asked Dexter. He looked at his clipboard. The application says notice was provided. I got one letter. I responded. They never replied. Dexter shrugged with his whole body. You'll want to show up to the hearing. The hearing was scheduled for July 9th. I had 5 weeks. This is where most people, tired farmers, people who've never been in a government meeting room, people who assume bureaucracy is impenetrable, would have given up, gone to the hearing, said their piece, been ignored, and gone home defeated. I am not most people, but I was still underestimating Margot. I went to that hearing, wore a clean shirt, brought a typed statement, photos of my field, a hand-drawn diagram of the drainage swale and where the proposed redirect would intersect it. The planning boardroom smelled like industrial carpet cleaner and burnt coffee, a universal smell, apparently, of rooms where decisions get made badly. There were 12 people in the audience. 6 were Ashford Crossing residents Margot had organized into a soft, cheering section. I made my case. I was precise, respectful, and factual. I explained that the proposed outflow volume exceeded what the natural swale could absorb without saturation damage to the lower field. I noted that I had not been provided adequate consultation. I asked for a 60-day continuance to commission an independent hydrological study. Margot stood up and spoke for 11 minutes. She used the phrase community benefit 7 times. She presented a color-printed report, spiral-bound, professional, expensive, prepared by a civil engineering firm out of Richmond. The report concluded that the redirect was hydrologically sound and posed minimal risk to adjacent agricultural land. The board voted 4-1 to approve the variance. The one dissenting vote came from a board member named Arliss Beaumont, who looked at me afterward in the parking lot and said, very quietly, "Get yourself a water rights attorney. Fast." Here's what I didn't know yet. Margot's engineering report was not wrong because it was fabricated. It was wrong because it modeled normal rainfall conditions, a 10-year storm event, which is standard practice. What it did not model was a 25-year storm event, which in Central Virginia happens roughly every 6 to 8 years. And what it absolutely did not account for was that the redirected outflow would combine with the existing swale load and back pressure against my field's natural drainage gradient. In plain English, the report assumed average rain. Central Virginia doesn't do average. Within 3 weeks of the variance approval, Ashford Crossing's contractor showed up with a mini excavator and 2 laborers and spent 4 days cutting a new drainage channel along the southern edge of my property line, grading it to flow directly into my lower field's swale entry point. The contractor was professional. He was doing his job. He showed me the permit. It was valid. The smell of fresh-cut earth and diesel exhaust hung over my south fence line for 2 days. I watched from a distance, documented everything on my phone. Wide shots, close-ups, GPS-tagged photos of the channel dimensions, and I did not say a word to the workers, because I had, by that point, finally called a lawyer. Her name was Cornelia Voss, 38 years old, sharp as a finishing nail, ran a small firm in Charlottesville that specialized in property rights and agricultural land use. She had a voice like she'd argued with judges for a living, which she had. She listened to my entire story without interrupting, then said, "They approved a variance on a flawed study. That's not a crime. But what they're about to do to your drainage gradient? That's a tort. Let's make sure they do it completely before we move." I asked what she meant by "before we move." "I mean, let them finish," she said. "Let the rain do the discovery for us." Cornelia's advice was to document and wait. That felt like agony, watching a slow-motion disaster and being told to take notes. But she was right, and here's why. In Virginia property law, a drainage tort claim is significantly stronger after demonstrated damage than before it. If I'd filed for an injunction immediately, the HOA's lawyers would have argued the harm was speculative. We needed the rain to tell the story for us. August was dry, maddening, ironically, given what we were waiting for. My lower field sat soggy but not saturated, the new channel trickling a modest amount of additional runoff that was, admittedly, manageable. I started to wonder if Cornelia had misread the situation. Maybe the engineering report was right. Maybe this would be fine. Margot sent me a letter in mid-August. This one was warmer in tone, almost neighborly. She wrote that she hoped we could move past our earlier misunderstanding, that Ashford Crossing valued its relationship with adjacent landowners, and that she'd be delighted to have me attend the fall community cookout as her personal guest. I showed the letter to Cornelia. "She's trying to establish goodwill on paper," Cornelia said. "Don't respond. Not even to decline the cookout? Especially not that." What I was doing while I waited, building a file. I pulled every document related to the variance application. Public record, all of it, available through the county clerk's office. I obtained the original Ashford Crossing subdivision approval from 2017, which included a stormwater management plan filed by the developer. That plan specified that all subdivision drainage was to be contained within the development's engineered retention system, with no external discharge to adjacent agricultural properties. This was a condition of the original site plan approval. Takeaway: subdivision site plans filed with the county are public record. Go to the county clerk and ask for them. They are a gold mine. I also hired a hydrologist named Gareth Finch, semi-retired, former state environmental agency, knew every watershed in the Piedmont, to independently review the HOA's engineering report and assess my field. Gareth drove out on a Tuesday, walked the entire lower field in rubber boots, took soil core samples, and spent 40 minutes at the new drainage channel with a measuring tape and a notepad. His preliminary conclusion? In a high rainfall event, the modified drainage configuration would cause the lower field swale to exceed capacity and back-saturate an area of approximately 2.1 acres. He also noted something Cornelia found very interesting. The channel the contractor had cut was positioned 16 inches over my property line in one section, not on the easement corridor, on my land, without authorization. "That's trespass and unpermitted construction," Cornelia said. "We'll hold that one too." September arrived, and with it, the remnants of a Gulf Coast tropical system that stalled over the mid-Atlantic for 3 days and dropped 9 inches of rain on central Virginia. I was out of state for a conference when it started. I drove back through sheets of rain on a Saturday evening, windshield wipers losing the argument, the radio reporting minor flooding in low-lying areas across 3 counties. I turned onto my road, headlights cutting through the dark and the rain, gravel crunching and then splashing under my tires, and I came over the small rise that gives you the first view of my back field. It was a lake, not metaphorically, a genuine copper-brown, wind-rippled lake where my south field used to be. 2 acres, minimum, standing water. My hay equipment, a small baler I'd parked near the south fence, was sitting hub-deep. The fence posts along the property line were submerged to their midpoints, and the new drainage channel was running like a fire hose, pouring the entirety of Ashford Crossing's stormwater overflow directly into my saturated field with nowhere to go. I stood in the rain and took 47 photos and a 6-minute video. Then I called Cornelia. "How bad?" she asked. "Remember how I said my lower field smelled like wet clay and something dead?" "Yes. It now is something dead. My baler's underwater." There was a pause. I could hear her smiling through the phone. "Good," she said. "File date is Monday. Get me a damage estimate from your equipment dealer first thing." Monday came with cold, clear skies and 4 inches of standing water still sitting in my lower field. The smell was profound. Rotting vegetation, anaerobic soil, the particular sour note of agricultural equipment that's been sitting in water. My neighbor Dale walked the fence line with me in the morning and said nothing for a long time. "She really did it," he finally said. "She really did." Cornelia filed a civil complaint against the Ashford Crossing HOA and Margot Whitfield individually in Albemarle County Circuit Court that Monday afternoon. The claims: drainage tort, nuisance, trespass, property damage, and violations of the original subdivision's stormwater covenant. The last one being the real knife, because it tied back to the original site plan condition that prohibited discharge to adjacent properties. The HOA got served on Wednesday. By Friday, I had received a phone call from their HOA's insurance carrier attorney, a man named Beauregard Sloan. Again, I couldn't write these names, who spoke in the smoothed-out cadences of someone who settles things fast and quietly. He offered, without preamble, $14,000 to drop the complaint. Cornelia's counter was $147,000, broken down to the cent: equipment damage, crop loss, soil remediation, surveying fees, hydrologist fees, legal fees, and, this was the part that made Sloan go quiet, a line item for loss of agricultural productivity, ongoing, based on soil saturation damage with a 36-month recovery projection. Sloan said he'd need to consult his client. In the meantime, and this is where Margot made her first truly unforced error, she sent a letter to my neighbors, not to me, to Dale, to the Okonkwo family whose property abutted mine on the north side, to the Pruitt family, yes, the same Pruitt she'd cited for the trash can, and to 3 other adjacent landowners. The letter was a masterpiece of passive-aggressive preemptive positioning. It described the lawsuit as a frivolous action by a difficult neighbor, characterized my field flooding as a pre-existing drainage issue, and expressed her hope that the community wouldn't be divided by one person's grievances. She mailed it on HOA letterhead. She signed it as HOA president. She had just used HOA resources in her official title to distribute defamatory characterizations of an active civil litigant. Cornelia, when I showed her the letter, did something I'd never seen her do before. She laughed. "She just handed us a defamation claim," Cornelia said. "And she did it in writing, on official stationery. Takeaway: when someone in an official capacity sends written communications that make false factual claims about you to third parties, that is textbook defamation per se. Save every letter, every email, every text. I added defamation to the complaint. But here's what was happening that I didn't fully appreciate yet. Margot's letter hadn't landed the way she intended. Dale showed me his copy and said, "She thinks I don't know you. I've known you 20 years. The Okonkwo family, Tobias and Renata, transplants from Atlanta who ran a small organic vegetable operation, called me directly. We got her letter," Renata said. "We wanted you to know we don't believe a word of it, and we've had our own problems with that HOA blocking our farm stand permit." The Pruitts, the veteran family, stopped by in person. Earl Pruitt, 64 years old, retired Army, shook my hand in my driveway. "She fined me for a trash can," he said. "I know. What do you need?" I didn't know yet exactly what I'd need from him, but I was starting to see the shape of something. Margot had spent years treating the landowners around Ashford Crossing like obstacles, annoyances, people to be managed and marginalized. She had been so focused on running her small fiefdom that she hadn't noticed what she was actually doing, building the coalition that was going to dismantle her. There's a particular autumn smell to rural Virginia in October: wood smoke and dried corn, and the iron cold of early frost in the morning. Standing in my driveway with Earl Pruitt, watching the sun come up pink over the field I was still fighting to save, I felt for the first time like I wasn't alone in this. That feeling matters more than most people admit. It's not just morale, it's strategy. Because what I was building, without fully realizing it, was witnesses. 3 weeks into the litigation, Cornelia called me on a Thursday evening with a tone in her voice I hadn't heard before. Careful and precise, like someone walking across ice. "I've been going through the subdivision documents," she said. "All of them. Back to the original 2017 approval. And? Did you know that Ashford Crossing's original stormwater retention pond was engineered to handle a 25-year storm event? Not a 10-year, 25. I did not know that. The developer's original permit specified it. It was a condition of approval. The county required it because the site drains toward agricultural land, a 25-year standard. You know what Breckenridge Harmon actually built? 10-year capacity? 8-year. He cut the retention pond size by 30% from the approved design and filed amended plans through a subordinate permit that the county planning office approved without cross-referencing the original condition. The HOA inherited an out-of-compliance stormwater system. They have been, for 6 years, operating a drainage facility that does not meet the conditions of their own site plan approval. The silence between us lasted a full 5 seconds. Cornelia. Yes. Does the HOA know this? Margot Whitfield has been on the county planning subcommittee for 2 years. She has access to all subdivision files in the county. Either she knew or she was negligent in not knowing. Either way, she cannot claim innocent reliance on a compliant system. Here is what this meant in practical terms. The HOA's entire legal defense rested on the argument that they'd acted in good faith on a properly engineered drainage solution. The Richmond engineering firm they'd hired had modeled their existing retention pond as the baseline, a pond that was, it turned out, 30% undersized relative to its own permit conditions. Their good faith defense had just collapsed. Takeaway: always pull the original site plan approval and any subordinate amended permits. Developers file amendments that contradict original conditions, and those amendments are sometimes approved by clerks who don't cross-reference. The discrepancy is public record. There was a second piece. Gareth Finch, my hydrologist, had been running groundwater flow models in his spare time, the kind of obsessive post-retirement project that only a man who genuinely loves watershed hydrology would undertake. What he found was that the modified drainage channel, by redirecting water into my lower field swale, had altered the subsurface water table gradient in a way that would, during sustained high rainfall periods, direct groundwater laterally toward the lowest elevation structures in Ashford Crossing, which were the basements of the 12 homes on Willowmere Court, the development's southernmost street. Those homes sat approximately 4 feet higher than my lower field. Their foundations rested on clay-heavy soil. Clay-heavy soil, when saturated from below by a shifting groundwater table, does not drain. It holds. Gareth thinks the basement flooding hasn't started yet, Cornelia said. Yet. He estimates 1 or 2 more high rainfall events. I sat with that for a moment. I had not engineered this. I had not manipulated anything. The physics of water moving downhill, the most honest, uncomplicated thing in the natural world, was simply following the path Margot had created for it. She had redirected the runoff into my field, and now the water was going to find its own way home. Should we tell them? I asked. Cornelia was quiet for a moment. We have a legal obligation to disclose foreseeable harm to third parties if we can prevent it. I'll send a letter to the HOA's attorney, formally, in writing, warning them. And if they ignore it, then they ignored a written warning, in discovery. Cornelia sent the warning letter on a Friday. Beauregard Sloan acknowledged receipt. The HOA held an emergency board meeting that weekend. I know this because Tobias Okonkwo knew someone who lived on Willowmere Court, and that person texted him a photo of the parking lot full of cars on a Sunday afternoon. Margot emerged from that meeting and doubled down. She hired a second engineering firm, this one out of Northern Virginia, with a glossier brochure, to produce a report disputing Gareth's groundwater model. I watched this with a particular kind of calm that comes from knowing the physics are not on the other side's payroll. Meanwhile, I was building the actual trap, not a metaphorical one, a real, physical, documented, legally defensible one. Here's what I did, step by step, over the following 3 weeks. First, I contracted with a company that installs and monitors agricultural drainage systems to place a series of soil moisture sensors in my lower field. 6 of them, wireless, transmitting real-time readings to a data logger in my barn. These sensors cost me $1,800 installed, and would, going forward, create a continuous, time-stamped record of soil saturation levels in my field, correlated with rainfall events. Every time it rained, the sensors would document exactly how saturated my field became, and how long it remained saturated. This was not dramatic, it was devastating. Second, I contacted the county's agricultural extension office and asked for documentation of the typical soil recovery timeline for clay loam agricultural land following sustained saturation. The extension agent, a man named Wendell, who'd been doing this for 30 years and had the weathered patience of someone who has explained soil science to skeptical farmers more times than he can count, pulled the data, wrote a 2-page summary, and signed it. Official. Free, public resource. Takeaway: your county's agricultural extension office is a free expert witness factory. Use it. Third, and this is the one that required creativity, I reached out to a licensed surveyor and had the property line restaked and documented. Professional survey, recorded plat, every corner marked with rebar, specifically focusing on the section where Gareth had identified the drainage channel crossing 16 inches inside my boundary. The surveyor confirmed it. We now had a recorded document proving the channel was on my land. I filed a notice of trespass with the county, not as a criminal complaint, but as a recorded civil notice, which created a public record that the encroachment existed and had been formally identified. Fourth, the coalition. Renata Okonkwo turned out to be extraordinarily organized. She'd been keeping her own file on HOA permit interference with her farm stand operation. Zoning objections, noise complaints they'd filed against her farm stand's weekend hours, a letter they'd sent to the county health department making unsubstantiated claims about her food handling. She had dates, copies, the whole file in a manila envelope she brought to my kitchen table on a Tuesday evening. Earl Pruitt contributed something different. He knew the County Board of Supervisors member for our district personally, a man named Whitaker Gaines, and he arranged a private meeting. We didn't ask Gaines to do anything improper. We simply walked him through the timeline, the undersized retention pond, the flawed variance process, the defamatory letter, the trespass, and asked him one question. Was the county aware that it had approved a subordinate permit amendment that contradicted the original subdivision condition? Gaines went very still. Say that last part again. We said it again. He asked for copies. Gaines then did something quietly significant. He requested that the county attorney's office review the 2017 Ashford Crossing subdivision approval file for compliance with all attached conditions. This was not a dramatic public action. It was an internal administrative review request from an elected official, but it put the county on notice that there was a compliance question, which meant that if the county's planning staff had known about the discrepancy and said nothing, that was now their problem too. Meanwhile, the second to last piece. Gareth Finch finished his full groundwater model and issued his formal report. 42 pages, color figures, peer-reviewed methodology citations. His conclusion was unambiguous. The modified drainage configuration had increased subsurface hydrostatic pressure against the foundations of Willowmere Court homes by a measurable degree, and in sustained high rainfall conditions, basement water intrusion in the lowest 3 to 5 homes was probable within the next 12 months. Cornelia forwarded it to Sloan. The smell of that autumn, wood smoke and cold clay and the distant note of something turning, felt like the season itself was watching to see what came next. I was ready. The sensors were logging. The survey was recorded. The coalition was assembled. Cornelia had a filing ready to add to the complaint. All we needed now was rain. November in Virginia does not disappoint. The first rain came mid-November, a 2-day event that dropped 4 inches. Not dramatic by Piedmont standards, but my sensors logged it faithfully. Saturation in the lower field hitting 94% at the 12-inch depth. Recovery time extending to 72 hours compared to the 24-hour pre-modification baseline. The data was automatic, time-stamped, and required no human interpretation to be compelling. Margot, apparently sensing that things were tilting, made her next move. She went to the county planning office, where she had, as mentioned, a seat on the planning subcommittee, and filed a formal complaint against my property. The complaint alleged that I was operating an unpermitted commercial agricultural facility and cited my hay sales as evidence of unlicensed commercial activity in a mixed residential agricultural zone. Let me explain why this was both infuriating and stupid. Virginia has one of the strongest right-to-farm statutes in the country. Under the Virginia Right to Farm Act, agricultural operations that predate adjacent development cannot be restricted, regulated, or declared a nuisance by local ordinance, HOA rule, or zoning action based on their agricultural character. My grandfather had been haying this field since 1961. Ashford Crossing had been built in 2018. The sequence mattered a lot. Takeaway: if you own agricultural land adjacent to new development, look up your state's right to farm statute. In most states, it is a powerful shield against exactly this kind of retaliatory regulatory action. The County Code Enforcement Office sent me a notice of investigation. The The same Officer Dexter, who by this point seemed personally embarrassed to keep showing up at my door, delivered it with the practiced neutrality of a man who knows he's being used as a weapon by someone who outranks him politically. "You know this is going nowhere," I said. Dexter looked at the ground. "I just deliver them." I handed Dexter a printed copy of the Virginia Right to Farm Act. He folded it and put it in his clipboard. The Right to Farm response took Cornelia approximately 40 minutes to draft. It cited the statute, documented the operational history of the agricultural use predating the development, and attached my grandfather's original deed from 1961. We filed it with the county attorney and copied the Board of Supervisors, including Whitaker Gaines. The complaint was dismissed in 12 days, but the next move was nastier. Someone, I cannot prove it was Margot, but the timing was exact, contacted the local weekly newspaper with a tip that I was involved in a lawsuit against the HOA and that I had threatened neighbors over the drainage issue. The paper ran a 3-paragraph item on page 6. It was thin and hedged with qualifiers, but it had my name in it and used the word dispute. Renata Okonkwo saw it and called me immediately. "She's trying to make you look unreasonable before this goes to trial." "I know. What do you want to do?" "I want to wait for the rain." The rain came on the first weekend of December, a nor'easter remnant that sat over the mountains and dripped for 4 days straight, 6.5 inches total, the kind of event that fills creeks to their banks and turns unpaved roads into brown rivers. My sensors spiked. My lower field went back underwater, and this time the data logger captured the full event curve: saturation onset, peak, duration, and recovery. Beautiful, objective, ruthless documentation. And Willowmere Court got water in 3 basements. Not catastrophic flooding, not yet, but enough. Standing water on basement floors, damaged drywall in one home, a ruined water heater in another. 3 families woke up to wet feet on a Monday morning and started making calls. The calls went to the HOA. The HOA's response, I later learned from a Willowmere Court resident named Fitzgerald, who had become quietly furious, was to tell residents to file homeowners insurance claims and that the HOA was investigating the drainage situation. They did not mention the pending lawsuit. They did not mention Gareth's report. They did not mention the warning letter Cornelia had sent to their attorney 2 months earlier. Fitzgerald knocked on my door on a Tuesday evening. He was polite, a little sheepish, clearly not a confrontational man, but pushed past his comfort zone by a ruined basement. He asked if I could tell him what I knew about the drainage situation. I invited him in. I showed him everything. He sat at my kitchen table for an hour, reading documents. When he left, he said, "I think I need my own lawyer." He did. Fitzgerald moved fast. Within 2 weeks, he'd connected with 4 other Willowmere Court homeowners who had water intrusion, and they'd collectively retained an attorney, a young but sharp property damage litigator named Desmond Arkwright out of Richmond. Desmond and Cornelia were acquaintances. When she told me who they'd hired, there was something in her voice that sounded almost like satisfaction. 5 new plaintiffs, same underlying cause, different attorneys, independent cases, but with deeply overlapping facts. Margot's response to the legal pressure multiplying around her was to accelerate, which is what cornered people with access to institutional resources almost always do. She called an emergency HOA meeting and proposed using $80,000 of HOA reserve funds, money that belonged to all 214 homeowners in Ashford Crossing, to retain a high-powered litigation firm out of D.C. to defend the HOA against coordinated legal harassment. The meeting minutes, which were distributed to all HOA members as required by Virginia HOA law, use those exact words: coordinated legal harassment. Takeaway: Virginia HOA law requires that meeting minutes be distributed to all members. Request them. They become evidence. 2 things happened after that meeting. First, 17 Ashford Crossing homeowners, people who had nothing to do with Willowmere Court, but who objected to $80,000 of their reserve funds being spent on litigation, formed an informal group and began consulting a separate attorney about whether the board had authority to spend reserve funds this way without a homeowner vote. In Virginia, it's murky, but the question was legitimate enough to cause internal paralysis. Second, Margot made her most reckless move yet. She contacted Gareth Finch directly, called his cell phone, which he'd listed publicly on his consulting website, and told him that his report was professionally irresponsible, that she would be filing a complaint with the State Board of Professional Engineers, and that he should consider his exposure carefully. Gareth recorded the call. Virginia is a one-party consent state. When he played me the recording over the phone, a tinny, slightly distorted audio of Margot's voice telling a credentialed, retired state environmental official that he should consider his exposure, I had to put the phone down and walk to the window for a moment. Outside, my lower field was still showing the scars of the December flooding. The soil was cracked in patterns where it had dried after saturation, pale clay plates lifting at their edges like something geological. 4 of my moisture sensors were still logging. The survey rebar at the property line caught the winter light. I picked up the phone. Gareth, don't call her back. Send that recording to Cornelia today. Already did. Attempted intimidation of an expert witness, in the context of active litigation, is, depending on circumstances, potentially obstruction. At minimum, it was discoverable. Cornelia added a supplemental filing. Meanwhile, Beauregard Sloan, the HOA's insurance carrier attorney, had gone quiet. We later learned why. The DC litigation firm Margot had retained had looked at the case file and told the insurance carrier, privately, that their exposure was significant. The undersized retention pond, the ignored warning letter, the documented trespass, the defamatory communications, the witness intimidation recording. The file had become, in legal parlance, a mess. The insurance carrier had begun making its own calculations, independent of Margot's preferences. Sloan called Cornelia in late December with a revised settlement offer. $89,000, plus an agreement to restore the drainage channel to its original alignment at HOA expense, plus a letter of retraction for the defamatory neighbor letter. Cornelia said she'd present it to her client. She presented it to me over the phone. I said no. Why? She asked, not arguing, genuinely asking. Because it doesn't fix the retention pond. It doesn't address Willowmere Court. It doesn't put anything on the public record. Margot writes a check. Nobody knows what happened, and she goes right back to running that HOA like her personal kingdom. Cornelia was quiet for a moment. You understand that going to trial carries risk. I know, but there's a county board of supervisors meeting in January, and Whitaker Gaines has finished his administrative review. Another pause. What did the review find? Gaines called me yesterday. The county is going to be making an announcement. There are moments in a long dispute when you can feel the weight shift, not dramatically, not with a sound, but with a kind of atmospheric pressure change, like the air before a storm. This was that moment. Margot had spent months escalating, retaliating, spending other people's money, trying to bury the problem under legal fees and planted stories. And what she had actually done was give us time. Time to build the record. Time for the physics to prove the case. Time for the community to see exactly who she was. January came cold and clear. The Board of Supervisors meeting was scheduled for the 14th. The Albemarle County Board of Supervisors met on the second Tuesday of January in a wood-paneled meeting room that smelled of old carpet and radiator heat, the kind of institutional warmth that makes everyone slightly drowsy until something real happens. The room had 47 seats and a standing row along the back wall. By 6:45 p.m., 15 minutes before the meeting began, every seat was filled. Whitaker Gaines had placed one item on the agenda under new business: administrative review of stormwater compliance, Ashford Crossing subdivision, permit number 2017-0441. It was listed as a 5-minute informational update. Most people in the room didn't know what it was. The Willowmere Court homeowners knew. The Okonkwo family was there. Earl Pruitt was there, in a pressed shirt. Gareth Finch sat in the second row with a folder on his lap. Cornelia sat beside me in the front row. Margot Whitfield was there too. Third row, silver bob immaculate, pearl earrings, a posture that said she'd been to 100 of these meetings and survived them all. She had not seen Gaines's full administrative review. Neither had most of the room. Gaines read it into the record with the flat, careful delivery of a man who wants the content to do the work. The summary: the county's own review had confirmed that the Ashford Crossing retention pond had been built to 70% of its permitted capacity. The subordinate permit amendment that had allowed this deviation had been approved by a now retired county planning staff member, without cross-referencing the original site plan condition. The county attorney had determined that the drainage variance approved in July, the one that authorized the redirect onto my property, had been granted based on representations about a drainage system that was not in compliance with its own approval conditions. The variance was therefore procedurally flawed and was being rescinded. The room was very quiet. Gaines continued. The county would be issuing a notice of violation to the Ashford Crossing HOA, requiring the retention pond to be brought into compliance with original permit specifications within 180 days, at the HOA's expense. The estimated cost of the required retrofit, $140,000 to $190,000. Margot stood up. She had parliamentary experience and she used it. She asked for the floor, she was given it, and she attempted to redirect the conversation toward the ongoing civil litigation and whether it was appropriate for the board to take administrative action affecting an active case. Gaines said, calmly, "The administrative review is independent of civil litigation. The compliance requirement exists regardless of any private lawsuit." A woman from Willowmere Court, I didn't know her, she'd come on her own, raised her hand and asked whether the HOA had been notified of the groundwater risk to their basements prior to the December flooding. Gaines said, "The county received a copy of a formal warning letter sent to the HOA's legal counsel in October. Yes." The room made a sound that meeting rooms don't usually make, a collective, involuntary intake of breath. Then Fitzgerald stood up. He was not a dramatic man, but he had 3 pages of notes, and he read them aloud, methodically, in the steady voice of someone who has been wronged and has done his homework. He described the basement flooding. He described being told by the HOA to file insurance claims. He described coming to my door and learning, for the first time, about the warning letter his HOA had received and ignored. He looked directly at Margot when he finished. Margot's attorney, the DC firm had sent a junior associate, leaned over and whispered something to her. She sat back down. The mic drop moment didn't come from me. It came from the board itself. The chair, a woman named Supervisor Holloway, who'd been on the county board for 11 years and had the particular patience of someone who has seen a lot of people waste public resources, asked one question. "Ms. Whitfield, in your capacity as a member of the County Planning Subcommittee, did you have access to the original 2017 site plan approval documents for Ashford Crossing?" The room went absolutely still. The radiator ticked. Someone's chair creaked. Margot said, "I don't believe that's a relevant question in this context." Supervisor Holloway wrote something down. "I'm going to ask the county attorney to review Ms. Whitfield's involvement in the variance approval process, given her dual role as planning subcommittee member and HOA president, for any conflict of interest concerns." There are moments of public accountability that don't look like explosions. They look like a person writing something down in a quiet room. This was that. Margot Whitfield resigned from the County Planning Subcommittee 11 days later. She resigned as HOA president the following month, citing personal health concerns. The civil case settled 3 weeks after the board meeting. The terms, $212,000 to me, including full soil remediation costs and a 36-month agricultural productivity recovery fund. The drainage channel to be removed and the property restored to pre-modification condition at HOA expense. The defamatory letter to be retracted in writing to every recipient. Separate settlements were reached with the Willowmere Court homeowners. The HOA's insurance carrier paid. Their premiums went up considerably. The soil remediation crew came in late March, when the ground was soft enough to work, but the field hadn't yet started its spring flush. They brought a small bulldozer, a soil aerator, and 14 tons of organic compost amendment. The process of restoring saturated, compacted clay loam to productive agricultural use is slow and unglamorous. It involves regrading, mechanical aeration, organic matter incorporation, and a lot of waiting. Wendell from the extension office came out to supervise the work plan. He walked the field in his boots, smelled the soil, squeezed handfuls of it, and said the lower 2 acres would likely return to full productivity in 2 growing seasons. I was fine with that. I had time. The drainage channel was removed in April. The contractor filled it, graded it smooth, and hydro-seeded the disturbed area. By May, you couldn't tell it had been there. My property line was exactly where the survey said it was. The sensors were still logging. I've kept them running, partly because the data is useful, and partly because I like having the record. The new Ashford Crossing board, elected after Margot's resignation, composed largely of the homeowners who'd objected to the $80,000 litigation fund, began the retention pond retrofit process in June. It cost $163,000. It was covered by the HOA's insurance settlement and a special assessment that Margot had, ironically, insisted would never be necessary. Willowmere Court has not had basement water intrusion since. Gareth Finch never received a complaint to the State Engineering Board. Margot apparently thought better of it, or her attorney advised against it. Gareth has since been retained as an expert witness in 2 other drainage litigation cases in the region. He told me over the phone that he considers the whole episode, in retrospect, the most interesting work he's done in 20 years. Cornelia Voss sent me a note after the final settlement check cleared. It said, "This is what the system is supposed to do. It doesn't always. It did this time." I have it framed in my barn. The community benefit piece came from Renata Okonkwo, who had the idea and the energy to push it forward. In the fall following the settlement, the adjacent landowner families, mine, the Okonkwos, the Pruitts, 2 other families who'd had their own minor conflicts with the HOA, partnered to establish a small, annual agricultural education day on my property. It was Renata's vision. Invite local school groups, demonstrate working farm operations, offer hands-on soil and watershed education. We called it the Piedmont Land Days, and the first one drew 63 kids from 3 elementary schools. Earl Pruitt built the picnic tables. Wendell from the extension office came and taught a session on soil science. Gareth brought a watershed model, a physical tray with a gradient and sprinkler system that demonstrated, in real time, exactly what happens when you redirect drainage onto land that can't absorb it. The kids understood it immediately. Several of them explained it to their parents. The Pruitt's adult daughter, who teaches 3rd grade in the county, called it the best field trip her class had done in 4 years. If any of this sounds familiar, if you've sat across a table from someone with a title and a color-printed report and felt the specific helplessness of being told that the system works and you just don't understand how, then you know why I'm telling this story. The system has tools in it: right to farm statutes, public records requests, agricultural extension offices, hydrological experts, elected officials who, sometimes, actually want to do the right thing when someone hands them the file. Use them. And if you've got an HOA nightmare of your own, a variance you didn't ask for, a fine you didn't deserve, a letter that landed on your doorstep from someone who thinks authority is the same as being right, drop it in the comments. I want to hear it. If this story gave you any satisfaction at all, share it with someone who needs it. And if you want the next one, because there is a next one, and it involves a different kind of neighbor and a property easement that was never recorded, hit subscribe. The field looks good this year. The hay came in clean. The sensors are still logging. Play stupid games.
$212,000. That's what a handwritten note and a backhoe cost Margot Whitfield. Not because the law is perfect, not because the system always worked, but because she made the oldest mistake powerful people make. She looked at Everett, a farmer with muddy boots, and decided he wasn't worth worrying about. She ignored his certified letter, ignored the formal warning about the basement, spent $163,000 of her own neighbor money retrofitting a pond that should have been built right in the first place, and when its own came apart at a county board meeting, in front of everyone, she cited personal health concern and walked away. Wrong about the boost, wrong about the man, wrong about the water. Here's what I want to ask you directly. How many of you are sitting on something right now? A file that doesn't make sense, a variance you never got notified about, a letter from an HOA board member who also sits on your county planning committee. How many of you just assumed there was nothing you could do? There's always something you can do. Drop your situation in the comments. Doesn't matter how small it seems. If this one felt good, hit like, share it with someone who needs it, and subscribe because the next story is already waiting. Small power, big damage, every single time.